healthcare systems don't really have a sophisticated standard measure for engagement. Acquisition feels a lot cleaner, right? You can look back into your data and see, has this person ever been to us? Nope. Now they have. We're going to say this is a newly acquired patient. But trying to figure out what's the right amount of engagement and how do you count that? Is it once a year? Is it 3 times a year? Is it changing your password, or is it actually like conducting a visit? And so that just gets really complicated to the point of like, what's the industry standard measure? I think, we haven't landed on it as a network just yet.
New choices, new players, new models of care. Consumer first healthcare is everywhere. For us to build the future, to see what's new, we gotta look at the world from a different point of view. Consumer innovation ain't going away. I say it's here to stay. Today it leads the way. We gotta drop the silos. We're all the same team. Experience, business, tech, and marketing. So join us now. Join the revolution. Consumer first health is the evolution. Status quo or like status no. Yeah, this is the healthcare rap. Yo, come on, let's go.
Welcome back to the leading podcast about consumer-centered healthcare. This is episode 359. I'm Jared Johnson, and here's what's going to go down today. We have the Flava of the week about recent movement by Congress to extend coverage for telehealth and health at home. Does this give us more hope for more convenient care? And how could it affect innovation efforts for those important aspects of consumer-centered care? I'll talk about that. Then it's an AVIA party, folks. Zain and I welcome Jen Melby and Sara Samson from the AVIA team to discuss their newest benchmarking report and some of the surprises that came up along the way. Spoiler alert, there's a lot of innovation going on when it comes to addressing consumers' health needs, but health systems overall aren't quite as sophisticated in their approaches as some might expect at this point. It's time to dive right in. Are you ready? Let's go.
Flava of the week.
There's more hope for health at home. There have been a couple of important pieces of news for telehealth and hospital at home programs in the last couple of weeks. Now, personally, I followed these updates on Best Buy Health's LinkedIn feed. They're concise and factual, and they explain why these updates are relevant. So what were those updates? They posted the following on September 30th. A key bill just took a major step forward in Congress. On September 18th, the U.S. House Committee on Energy and Commerce unanimously passed the Telehealth Modernization Act of 2024, which could transform how healthcare is delivered to millions. This bill would extend the hospital at home waiver for 5 more years, allowing Medicare recipients to continue to receive acute care at home, and it would continue telehealth flexibilities for another 2 years, making healthcare more accessible for seniors, people with mobility challenges, and those in rural areas. These extensions are vital as many hospitals and patients have come to rely on the program since its launch in 2020. We're excited to see how this impacts healthcare innovation in the U.S. and the role it plays in shaping the future of care at home solutions. Let's push for a swift vote on the House floor. Then 4 days later, they posted the following. CMS, or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has just released a pivotal study comparing acute hospital care at home to traditional hospital care, revealing valuable insights into healthcare delivery trends. Lower mortality rates were observed for patients treated at home, showing that home-based care can deliver quality outcomes that are on par with, if not stronger than, hospital settings. Higher patient and caregiver satisfaction with care at home emphasizes the power of comfort and personalized environments in health outcomes. And lower post-discharge Medicare costs for many conditions suggest potential for significant long-term savings, even with slightly longer hospital stays at home. These updates are significant because Best Buy and a handful of others have made their bets on these waivers being in place for the long term, but many others who could be investing in these areas have stalled their innovation while waiting for the bill to become permanent. The last post concluded, "At Best Buy Health, we're proud to support many organizations at the forefront of this transformation to create more human-centric healthcare." And that's the point to me, creating more human-centric healthcare. The home is a big part of that vision and must continue to be a center of long-term, consumer-centered healthcare transformation. And as that happens, it's a win for everyone. Let's do what we can to push these efforts forward and show our support for ongoing, permanent modernization of telehealth and health at home. That's another way that we'll build the healthcare of tomorrow. And that's the Flava of the week.
The flow.
All right, everyone, let's get into the flow. This is going to be really fun one. Zain, welcome back. How have you been?
Not bad, not bad. I was on vacation a few weeks ago. I think we chatted, and still thinking about our last episode we recorded with the Oura Ring. That one's still playing in my head. But I'm excited to be here today. And this is probably the first time in my whole career with the healthcare app that I've brought on, or that we're going to be showcasing some of my colleagues from AVIA Health Innovation. So this will be fun. I feel like it'll be weird asking questions because I know the answers or know too much, but I'm excited to have them. So I'll turn it to you, Jared.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. That's one reason why this episode is going to be just really, really insightful. So let's introduce our guests. We have Jen Melby with us. Jen Melby is the Vice President of Integrated Services for AVIA, and Sara Samson is the Senior Director of Digital Performance. Jen and Sara, welcome. Thanks for coming to the Healthcare Wrap.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. We're excited to have a conversation today.
Outstanding. Jen, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Who you are? What would you like people to know about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Integrated Services for AVIA. So in that role, I do a variety of things. But for those of you who are listening and may not know, we are a digital transformation partner for both healthcare systems and digital solution companies. Of note, I just joined AVIA this past spring. And before that, I was the Vice President of Consumer Experience and Digital Innovation for Piedmont Healthcare in Georgia.
Thanks, Jen. Sara, about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. As mentioned, I'm a Senior Director on the Digital Performance team at AVIA. So I've been with AVIA just over 3 years. And prior to AVIA, I spent about 9 years at the Mass General Brigham system. Maybe you all have heard of that one.
Heard of it. Yep, heard of it.
Fantastic. Okay, so all four of us here then have previous health system experience. Zain, I'm curious, what do you hope we dive into today?
Well, something that I hope we dive into, I know it's on the speaker's notes here, is talking about the benchmarking that AVIA does. To Sara's point, I think it's very unique. And even before I joined AVIA, when I was with Henry Ford Health System, that always, when AVIA would present its benchmarking work, that would always make me, sit up in my seat and see how we at the time perform relative to other members. I mean, frankly, I don't think it's a data set that a lot of other groups have access to. So I think it's very unique. And so I hope the two of them will dive into, what are some of the insights that AVIA and its members are learning about the industry relative to digital transformation as we share numbers and benchmark each other to see who succeeds where. And so that's what I'm hoping to get out of it.
I love it. Well, you know what? Let's dive right in. We mentioned the benchmarking report. Let's talk about that, because I think that's going to help us set the stage for our conversation today. And I will say, from an outsider's perspective, right, meaning non-Avian, I'm definitely interested in just seeing that someone isn't just an N of one, that they're not just like the one data point somewhere where there are trends where you can see that any particular health system isn't just doing things a certain way. This is a fast follow industry. It's everyone wants to know what everyone else is doing before they kind of, set foot in a certain direction. And they at least want some social proof to start a different direction. Innovation is just unique a little bit that way as far as health systems and hospitals go. So I'd love to just hear, some context about like what the report measured, how it was developed, just some basics about the study, and then we'll hear, some of the insights there. But Jen, can you walk us through, what was this benchmarking report all about?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think healthcare is a very unique industry in that everyone is very open and willing to collaborate, because at the end of the day, it's quality of care and better experience that matters, which is really nice, which is why I love being in healthcare. And so that was actually really the genesis for even creating a benchmarking study and starting to do this on a routine basis. So we started this in actually just 2021, starting with consumerism measures, because that at that time was really what folks were most mature with. So thinking about online scheduling type performance measures, virtual care performance. It has since expanded to about 15 or more different measures that span across other components, like how is the care model changing? Like we're noticing that more and more care is shifting into the home with remote monitoring, or a lot of healthcare systems are investing in unique programs like virtual nursing to really help retain nurses and improve their quality of life, to healthcare systems thinking about unique ways to improve operational efficiencies great example of that being like the convergence of ambient documentation is not really popular. So what started as just a pure consumerism, digital front door effort has really expanded into a wider breadth and depth of digital services. That being said, we have the most data on consumerism and can kind of see some trends emerging. Who's doing it really well and leaning in? What are things that are stagnating? Which has really been interesting. And I think the two pieces that I think are the most notable is one, the network has helped define standard definitions where, that seems kind of simple, but it's really important. If you're going to benchmark, you all have to be defining something in the same way. And because organizations use a variety of different digital tools, you can't rely necessarily on the vendor to provide the definition. You kind of have to have that third party. And it also allows us to set targets and goals and benchmarks. And so like for me in my previous role at Piedmont, I really leveraged this to help set our internal targets and goals. It actually went so far as to inform what our management incentive plan benchmarks were going to be. So like it had really big impacts for the organization. And that was something that I was clamoring for because I was like, I don't know what good looks like. And every other member was saying the same thing. So it's been really useful in just helping set the tone for what does good look like for digital transformation.
Let's talk through some of those main points, like some of the main findings here. What are a couple of those things that you found interesting?
Yeah, I can kind of dig into that a little bit. It's hard to kind of parse down of like, five, because we've done 5 cycles now of this. And so it's, it's a little hard to kind of parse it down. But I think, what we found, so first of all, as Jen had mentioned, we really started off more just measuring, pretty, I don't say basic, but sort of, consumer focused metrics that were looking at things like online scheduling, virtual care, or like virtual visits. We started looking a little bit into the patient portal, but that was a whole other kind of interesting level. And we can maybe, if we're talking about patient engagement, maybe we can kind of touch back on that and sort of why that was a little controversial. What we've seen is we have not, we've seen a little bit of growth, and definitely there's some organizational outliers. You talked about kind of N01, like we definitely see some organizations just sort of time after time, just sort of, they're kind of set above the rest. But overall, just really, really modest growth in these areas because it's hard. So online scheduling, as an example, right? Like while we've not seen sort of a ton of growth sort of in general, we have over time looked at, we've sort of parsed the data out by specialty and like primary care. And then we've also recently incorporated some sort of subspecialties like cardiology, behavioral health, et cetera. And what we've seen is that in the primary care space, online scheduling definitely has a little bit more of an uptick and a little bit more growth. As we can imagine, it's just because it's a little bit more standard. I think it's just an easier kind of to convince those doctors. And in some ways, I think it probably eases their burden, especially when it comes to like same day appointments and things like that. We also asked about new patient kind of breakdown of online scheduling. That was something else that was new. And we thought that was an interesting one because ultimately, like, if you can get a new patient in through online scheduling, that's the potential to actually like impress that patient and kind of acquire that patient, for life is the goal. So, what we saw actually was in cardiology and orthopedics, those were the areas that seemed to be the highest in new patient. And then talking about virtual care, we do continue to kind of see that just like inch down. I feel like we hit that plateau, sort of mid-COVID. But behavioral health is sticking around, right? Again, those numbers have significantly decreased, but, that is an area that just really lends itself to virtual care, and it will likely stay, but there's clearly like opportunity in these other areas as well. When we start to talk a little bit more, as Jen had mentioned, where we delved a little bit more into the kind of the inpatient space, the acute care space, what we're seeing is, again, like not, there's sort of modest sort of performance in these areas. And it's just because it's new, folks, it really takes time to kind of build these programs out. What something interesting is in the virtual nursing space, we are actually seeing that 60% of our network has virtual nursing enabled in some capacity, right? It may not be sort of fully scaled. They may sort of have like more basic technology that they're looking to enhance, but that's clearly just an area. And like, that's the focus of so many of kind of the AVIA engagements. So that's pretty critical. And then, I had mentioned, that we do see organizations that are high performers, and we actually even hand out at our annual summit, we hand out awards, and, we'll see some of the same health systems kind of win the awards over and over again. But what's interesting is you can see that, you may have an organization that's really high performing in the consumerism space, but they're more modest in like the acute care space. And then kind of the opposites. We've really seen that we have like really two leaders in those areas, and they're totally different organizations. That's just kind of an interesting.
I need to stop you, Sarah. What is it that we call our awards? I think it's funny.
The AVIAs.
The AVIAs. I'm sure some of our members are listening. They need to win an award next year.
That's been a fun thing as well. And I mean, that's sort of just been a little aside of how we use this and sort of to kind of entice our members to report out and kind of get them to be a little competitive too. So
it works.
Yeah.
I was chatting with one of our members and their executive team, and when they found out they didn't win, they said, well, what would it take to win? I said, this, and this. And so we'll see what happens next year.
One other thing I was going to kind of add, I mean, I think sort of overarching, right? Like these are more process kind of focused metrics. When we're talking about, the percent of appointments scheduled online, the percent of, sync asynchronous visits. But these, and as I kind of alluded to with the online scheduling of new patients, these all tie into the business KPIs, and they're critical. So if you're not moving, these metrics, then you're probably not moving kind of the business KPIs either. And so we really try to hang kind of everything around that, where, that's at the end of the day, that's what's going to sort of help to either cut costs or bring in, additional revenue to the organizations.
Well, I love that, right? Because this benchmarking can only help in that area of connecting the dots between the business value and something like engagement or virtual nursing and so forth. And of course, that's what drives the creation of those service lines or drives innovation measures in a lot of health systems. Did I hear right? Was there something about patient engagement that was either like potentially a little controversial or just like that was interesting?
Yeah, I mean, and Jen, you can probably kind of talk to it too, just given, you're coming from a space that I imagine the portal was definitely a mechanism. And I think, a lot of organizations, some and more are creating, their own apps. And then that becomes like a more robust kind of tool, right? Mm-hmm. That can engage the patients. But, sort of the basic kind of tool or the kind of the table stakes tool is the portal. And because so many folks have Epic, it's typically MyChart. And we did start to kind of, we would, for the first couple cycles of benchmarking, we would ask about portal kind of activity. So sort of how many folks do you have enrolled? What's your active kind of rate? And that was honestly just a really tough thing to measure, because it's sort of, well, what's active? And you really want to know, like, if a patient just sort of like logs in or they're sort of changing their password or anything like that, like that's not, but you want to see, like, are they really like engaging with the health system? And that was a tough one. And I think we'd love to figure out a better way to kind of measure engagement, because again, that leads to like the stickiness. So Jen, I don't know if you had any kind of thoughts on that. I know we've talked about it.
Engagement in general, I think, is just a really tricky thing. It's not as clean as like a normal retail business. I think there's so many different things with like a healthcare encounter that feel unique. And so healthcare systems don't really have a sophisticated standard measure for engagement. Acquisition feels a lot cleaner, right? You can look back into your data and see, has this person ever been to us? Nope. Now they have. We're going to say this is a newly acquired patient. But trying to figure out what's the right amount of engagement and how do you count that? Is it once a year? Is it 3 times a year? What is engagement? Is it, to Sarah's point, like, is it changing your password, or is it actually like conducting a visit? And so that just gets really complicated to the point of like, what's the industry standard measure? I think we haven't landed on it as a network just yet.
Jen, as you and Sara are talking, I'm just comparing and contrasting a conversation we had not too long ago. And I think I mentioned in the opening here with Oura Ring. Obviously, they're in a totally different space. They're a smart ring that helps you measure your sleep and, a whole myriad of other things. And when we talked about engagement with them, they're measuring how many times consumers come to their platform, their app per day. Not like, did they just come once, but like how many times per day, per hour. And so I think it's just really interesting to compare and contrast how hospital systems, they're just happy if they came maybe once a week or once a quarter, where, these wellness companies that more and more, building a infrastructure backwards to get into healthcare they're looking at daily engagement, just like social media would, or a consumer packaged good company. And so I'm just thinking out loud here, to me, that would be where health systems need to go. The challenge would be that, health systems aren't necessarily offering services that I would want to procure, look at every single day, right? Like I don't particularly care to look at my lab values every day, right? Or my bill every day, or when is my upcoming appointment? And so I think health systems will likely always struggle until they start to offer those more upstream services, which we know some of them are putting their heads together around to think about. And so just an interesting reflection there.
No, I think it's a great point. It's like, at what point do we move away from just episodic care to actually engaging in a relationship with the patient and their household?
I wanted to ask about, both of you alluded to it, that, in addition to the benchmarking, some of the work that AVIA does in measuring return on investment or the impact of digital in health systems can be very, very difficult. I know that firsthand, coming from health systems, but wondering if you could paint that picture for our audience. Why is this so difficult? I've been in meetings where the data is contested. Would love to just hear, what is it that makes this so hard? What are some strategies and tactics that you all use with executive teams to, one, collect the data, but two, present it in a way where it's at least defendable? Would love to get your perspective there.
There are a variety of reasons that make it difficult. One is just defining the measures that matter and getting everyone to nod their heads in alignment of this is what is going to be meaningful for us to track as a value contribution. But once you get through that, then the next conversation is, okay, but how can you prove that what we did can be isolated, that impact can be isolated to what digital did versus maybe what your clinical operations team did? There's always this kind of contention between how do you allocate the value, whether it's revenue generation or cost savings across all the variety of departments that it takes in a healthcare system to deliver the care. And that's something that I think just takes really strong governance and leadership and accountability. In addition to the digital performance metric benchmarking we do in the spring, we also conduct a survey in the fall that's around structure and governance. And it's kind of neat to be able to compare who's doing well on these performance metrics and then how are they structured. And it's very clear that if you've got strong accountability at your senior leadership level, if you've got governance that works and you've got dedicated resources, both in FTEs and in financial budget, you tend to perform stronger on your metrics.
Shocking.
I know it's not rocket science, but it's really hard to do governance well in very complex healthcare systems, to the point of once you start trying to measure the value, you have to go back to a governance team that's all nodding their heads on the same, this is why we're doing digital. You're not doing digital just because it's a fun new toy to bring in. You're doing it because it's going to drive benefits to your patients, but also to your bottom line. And it's just making sure that you're creating the structure internally to even have those conversations feels like the first big step.
It's funny how it always just comes back to that hard stuff that people don't want to do, like the Quint Studer governance, leadership, and management. No matter how future-facing or sexy a project is, its success always lands on those basic things we all learned in MBA school or when we first started, like who's accountable, who's driving it, who's leading it, so on and so forth.
That definitely relates to the engagement discussion we were just having, right? I mean, what are we measuring? Statistic I'd recently heard related to engagement in a portal in my charter, the equivalent anywhere, was that when you measure that in terms of a monthly active user, the majority of patients log in during 3 months in a year. So they might log in multiple times that month, but there are 3 months out of the year that they are a monthly active user. And we can infer all sorts of things from that in terms of what we were just pointing to of what reasons are we giving somebody to log in? How are they engaging? What do they want to find out as opposed to something like a fitness tracker? So there are connections there, but there's the hard work, I think, is what all of you were just getting at is it a chicken or the egg? What comes first? You're told, well, prove the ROI of investing in this and building out the team. And we have to have a strategy. We have to actually do something here to be able to measure. And to do that, we need the resources. And so, it feels like that's cyclical, that will never get fully solved anywhere. And each organization seems like they approach it slightly differently. But the reality of that conversation driving ultimately how somebody is going to stack up in some of these benchmarks, I think is pretty clear from what all of you have been saying.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of kind of circle back to what Jen was saying, and then also sort of the point that you were making is, I think digital investment is a really interesting thing, because if you when I think about sort of like traditional sort of kind of approval, like capital budget or whatever approvals, right? Like, it's not hard to prove the value of like a new MRI machine, and you're going to get that value really quickly too, right? Because it's just, either you have the demand or you don't. If you have the demand, then, you'll get people through, and it's easy to kind of pay that down. It's a lot harder on the digital side because the payoff, it will come quicker, right? If we do the things that you're all talking about sort of being, having the accountability in place, having the change management, all of that. But like, it still just takes time. For example, we keep talking about sort of like virtual nursing, acute care of the future, to equip rooms, right? That's just such a big technology investment. And like, there's so many use cases and the value will come, but it's a little bit of faith too, right? And it's not like the health systems just have a bunch of extra capital laying around, even though they know it's something they like have to do, because it's just the way of the future. It's the way they're going to sort of be able to kind of, combat like workforce shortages, things like that. But, it's tough.
It's almost like digital is becoming like the competitive necessity. Like, you just have to do it. It's sort of like what websites were way back in the day, where, having an e-commerce platform was seen as novel and pioneering. Well, now it's just like, no one would argue that, yes, we need to have an e-commerce platform. Customers need to be able to either book an appointment or buy a product from our website, hands down, right? And I think and that was a little bit hard. Well, I guess it's easier to measure, but in the early days, it was harder to measure. And I think digital health will get there. Health systems will realize this is just something we have to do to stay competitive or at par with those that we're competing with.
It's the language of like, what bets do I want to make and having honestly a network of a lot of other organizations that are willing to make the bets, where you can kind of have some, to Sarah's point, some of our members are way more focused on the acute care side. Others are focused on the ambulatory consumer side. And so there's leading systems that are kind of helping to prove out the value. And then eventually, Zain, to your point, some of these things become just facts. They're not bets. They're just, all right, you need to invest in a digital front door that actually works. And then you need to get your providers to open up access to make sure the digital front door works. Like, there's all these building pieces and playbooks that kind of emerge from starting to track metrics, which is really nice.
On the note of tracking metrics, would love to get your guys' perspective on how are health systems, once they start tracking the metrics, or maybe they're ingesting benchmarking data from AVIA or elsewhere, how are they sharing this with their teams? And I think back to the trauma I would go through every year working with our executive team at Henry Ford to put together the executive dashboard and goal setting and all that. And so curious, how are health systems and some of your members representing this internally? Are they using scorecards, or is there like a meeting everyone goes to, a newsletter? Maybe it's a funny dance or interpretive dance to like get the word out that here's how we're performing and here's how we're measuring.
A rap, perhaps.
Could be a rap.
In a variety of ways. Yeah, I think everybody, because really it's so culture specific of like what works like well in your organization. I've seen some of our network members have very polished digital performance scorecards and books, like annual reports that they create and send out and incorporate the benchmarking data. Others, they're more in like an incubator stage with a certain digital. So it's like they kind of keep it internally as they're trying to figure out and have some of those negotiations with their internal finance teams to set their own internal targets. So I think it really just depends on where a healthcare system is in their journey and how they want to use the data, because it can be used in a wide variety of ways.
That's useful, because I do think that's what drives the conversation at that point.
Yeah.
So much can get lost if that isn't in a way that's clear and easy to communicate. So for sure there. I wanted to ask, I know this isn't necessarily something that was included in the benchmarking itself, but I'm just curious, like if that's informed your points of view on this at all, just because we have focused on healthcare, what we'd refer to as health adjacent areas or healthcare adjacent areas this season on the show here. And what we're seeing are opportunities more than anything. There are opportunities here to really grow. Like I said, I know that's not necessarily a category from the report, but did anything from the report or just your own personal views inform your point of view about what areas might make sense for health systems to explore that aren't traditional care? When we're talking fitness, weight loss, mental health, we're talking about just functional medicine. Are there areas that are just kind of like, that those are things that might make sense more than others?
It's an interesting question because there's so many different services companies out there trying to kind of get your share of wallets. Some of them are meaningful and worthwhile. And I think as a healthcare system, as you're trying to think through like, what does that look like for us to play in that space? It's a really daunting task. And I think that the kind of the searching for I need something, where do I go for that is still a big pain point for consumers. And I don't know that healthcare systems can expect to encompass all of that. But I think there are really unique ways to solve that searching, problem identification, and here's your options in a very elegant way. And, we all talk about Amazon playing in this space, and they do a really elegant job of marketing to you and putting their name in my inbox on a regular basis. They've got that async tool, which is interesting because I think that's actually an area where our healthcare systems perform the lowest when we think about performance across their digital front door. And so there's this kind of natural question of like, do you partner? Do you compete your own? How do you kind of use that like search to schedule to grab a broader kind of share of your patient's just thought process and kind of help steer them in a way that is like, you're a trusted partner with them. You need weight loss services. Let me try to make it easy for you to figure out what's going to work for you in an elegant, engaging way. And I think the healthcare systems really struggle with that. Others do a really good job, but just how do we kind of connect the dots there and be that trusted partner for all of our patients? That probably wasn't the most elegant way of saying that, but I just think our pain point is still directing patients in an elegant way to any service. And there's a lot of opportunity there.
I think sort of the elephant in the room is always that healthcare is still majority fee for service.
Sure.
Right. And so I think that impedes so much of the opportunity to focus on areas like health and wellness. And like, it makes total sense, right? And I even think about remote patient monitoring, for example. Even that's such a hard play if you're not fee for value. I mean, there is reimbursement associated with it. You could, it's not the easiest, I think, to set up. So there's a mixed bag of even sort of who decides to even set it up for reimbursement. So it's just, I think there's like so much opportunity there. And if it wasn't about just sort of like having to make sure that the economics work, from a fee for value standpoint, it could be a different story.
Well, I know back home up in Canada, it still hasn't fully taken root. And that's for the most part a value-based model, but it comes back just to org structures and know-how. I think health systems just struggle. Like, how do you deploy into the home? But wanted to touch on one thing before we jump to the next question. Jen, really appreciate how you kept using the term elegant when you were explaining, where health systems are at. I think that's something would encourage our listeners to hold on to is a lot of health systems that we work with and, even other folks who bring on this podcast, they functionally can do the digital front door capability. Like, sure, there's a scheduling system, there's a triage tool, but the user experience and the user interaction is terrible. It's not elegant, to your point. It's not slick like an Apple product or an Amazon product or Fitbit or the Oura Ring. Like, it's one thing to have the capability and say it's turned on. It's another thing to have a team of designers go through it and make sure that everything's intuitive and works. And that's also, if I may, be the interview for a second. That's, I think, where health systems still need to lean into. Even those who have advanced capabilities may not have the, they have the cake, but they don't have the icing and the flowers and the nice lettering and the fondant on their cake to make their digital capabilities palatable, if you will. And so I think that's a big opportunity still for the industry. And frankly, it goes back to, earlier seasons of this episode or of this podcast where health systems don't have some of these folks on staff like designers, user experience designers, service designers, who do this day in and day out for the disruptors who we're competing against.
Hopefully, this is like a little bit of a pipe dream, but hopefully as AI kind of becomes more ingrained, not that sort of the same people doing those jobs will necessarily be able to shift, but maybe it will open up sort of resources to be able then to bring on, because I mean, it will have to be that way. Because I mean, right now, like the digital teams overall, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but in our governance and structure survey we do, like they're relatively small.
Yeah.
Granted, there could be sort of dispersed, services, but yeah, there's probably like one or two sort of like designer types, right? And like marketing or something like that. And they're doing like the whole organization. So
yeah, the other thing I've seen, and I was actually just chatting with Kelly Gill about this. He comes on our show from time to time. He's a recruiter specifically in the digital health space. And we were catching up and we're talking about how we've noticed in some digital teams, like, and I don't mean this to be rude, Sara, because I know this is your career path, but administrative fellows end up in there or project managers end up there. And basically what's happening is administrative generalists, so to speak, or MBAs end up in these like product digital design roles. And that's really not their skill set. Sure, they can help, but it's a totally different set of skills than like someone who's truly went to design school, truly understands the soup to nuts. And so in the same way we wouldn't put a primary care physician into a neurosurgical suite and say, hey, go to town, we shouldn't just be putting generalists in these digital innovation roles, trying to do best in class digital strategy without the tools, the skill set, and the know-how, if that makes sense. And I see that time and time again, particularly in mid-market health systems who frankly struggle with their budgets to hire in, folks from the coast and Silicon Valley to do this for real, right?
That's so true. I would latch onto that too, and just echo that thought of having anybody in those roles will get you further as a health system. And yet it also just demonstrates how recent anything related to service design, digital innovation, consumer engagement, those things, they're relatively new compared to the hundreds and hundreds of years old practice of medicine itself. So the need to continually justify investments and people and resources in these non-clinical, forward-facing areas, I don't see a way around that. That will always be a challenge. And so just being able to have like the best business case that you can create and just like recognize that's part of it. We're not going to get around that. So like, let's lean into the fact of like that. Yeah, this is the story we have to tell. We need the data to do that. We need these benchmarks. Like we need to understand what other organizations are doing. I mean, all of this just helps build the case. And so I do think it's super helpful to be able to acknowledge that and not try to fight it, like not try to fight the fact that, yeah, these teams are probably going to be very small. If they are there, we need to build on that, instead of like continually tearing it all down and starting from scratch and reorging everything. Time and time again, that's been the answer in a lot of organizations. Well, let's just start again and give everyone a new title. And sometimes that is the answer. But I do think we can incrementally get to a better place if we just kind of lean in. And so, yeah, I think that was helpful to think it through that way. I'd love to hear from each of you. Sara, maybe you first, in terms of like what gives you hope for where healthcare is headed?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Like it is very easy to kind of get defeated. And I mean, I've joked with Jen before about this, but I mean, and I think a lot of us that have entered this field at one point in time, like you entered it because you wanted to make a difference. You wanted to sort of help to change, the sort of healthcare delivery. I definitely had experience with family members that were subpar. And I'm like, oh, like this has to be better. I can help. Right. And then you sort of, enter in it, you work in it for like 20 years and it's sort of, it shifts around a little bit, but I do think with the technology and the kind of way that, organizations can leverage digital to solve problems, I think is probably the biggest opportunity there. I mean, I think it's still the challenges of figuring out how to actually do it. But, there's just some real ways that we can improve, I think, healthcare delivery for like the future generations. And we have to, just because the numbers are going to be so high, just given the sort of the older generation that's coming up. So I think that makes me helpful. And I think, we see also what's the great thing about working at AVIA is you're able to see across the country in so many different geographies and demographics. And they're all doing amazing stuff, right? So it's the rural populations, it's the cities, it's, so anything in between. And so that helps. And you hear really good stories. So I think that kind of keeps me going.
Love it. Jen, what about you?
No, I agree. I think it is inspiring to be in rooms with a lot of different healthcare system leaders and digital solution company leaders. And just to know that there are a lot of smart and inspiring and inspired people who wake up every day trying to work through these problems. And while the performance on the data that we talked about may not be stellar today, it's way better than what it was 3 years ago. So like even in 3 years' time, we're seeing improvement. And now things like a digital front door that was a brand new term 3 or 4, 5 years ago is almost like, okay, let's stop using that. Everyone's doing it now. Like, so there's progress being made and there's still new ideas coming up. Like there are still novel things that keep coming up that you're like, would never even thought about that. And it solves so many pain points and problems, and it kind of re-energizes you, every so often, which is really nice.
I love that. Perfect place for us to wrap there. Thank you both for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with. We've had Jen Melby and Sara Samson from AVIA. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.